Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 56 of SCOTONOMICS. A special welcome to all those viewers who have been watching us since we started over a year ago now. We've got people watching us on Facebook, YouTube, and also on Twitter. So welcome to you all. Now, tonight we've got a conversation with not an economist, but a politician. But I would say a politician who seems to be open to new ideas, aware of a different understanding of how the economy really works, and someone who's looking for economics to solve the problems that he sees day to day, not just in his own constituency, but across the United Kingdom. Now, Angus MacNeil is a SNP MP, and he's also the chair of the Trade Committee at Westminster. So he's someone who's deeply involved in the big part of our economy, which is trade. And I think that explains his awareness and his interest in the impact of Brexit. And we cover a little bit of that in the interview. Now, we were fairly open with Angus. We asked him a few different questions. His main stipulation was that there was an economic extremism in Westminster. So that's how I started the conversation. I hope you enjoy this, and please do like and share if you get something from it, and I'll be back on at the end to answer any of your questions or go through your comments. But please do drop your comments and your questions if you've got any in the chat. Enjoy my conversation. Karen pops up at the end of this, our conversation with Angus MacNeil. Well, I really wanted to get you on because we're going to cover a few things around government debt, and also I want to go back to your point about the size of the population and the impact that has. But I saw you described the Westminster government as economic extremists, and I just wanted to give you the kind of opportunity to explain to people what you mean by that, and in what way do you think the UK government is extreme?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that I've seen, particularly since the time of George Osborne, in their time, well, the last 12 years really, when they could, the policy of austerity, the policy of maybe selling off the Royal Mail to basically George Osborne's pals at a knockdown price, the policy of teaching moral lessons to people with money, the way the poor have to be punished and the rich have to be incentivized, the policy of always going towards cuts and hair shirt rather than towards growth. Policies that have ultimately left as I said at Prime Minister's Questions this week, the middle earners of the UK 20% worse off than the middle earners of France, and the lower earners 25% worse off. Or the bottom 5% of earners in the UK, sorry, the bottom 5% of Irish earners being 63% wealthier than the bottom 5% in the UK. And I think it's that sort of economic extremism that's not looking at it's also penny wise, pound foolish. It spoils the ship for a halfpenny worth of tar. They don't invest where investment's required. They would rather cut, and that was particularly. I mean, I think there's perhaps they've got more excuses during this time, or more places to hide during this time of post-pandemic and the Ukraine war, although they're not a lot, because the OECD show they don't have a lot of space to hide, and they're the slowest growing of the 32 than they did in the George Osborne years, when it was a real political choice. It was a macho thing they were doing then, and George Osborne, in his extremism, went on about debt all the time, but the point was it was debt to GDP. He started his austerity with a debt to GDP of 60%. And he ended up with 80%. So he's a failure on his measure, on every measure. And the thing he forgot about was growth. And they don't do things, in my view, that help growth. Their only pro-growth policy is to give tax cuts to the rich and hope that something happens. They don't really believe in planning or thinking. I mean, you could take the example here that we have in the Highlands and Islands of Ofgem. Ofgem charging means that their electricity costs, generated renewables cost 16 times more to take to the UK market here than it does from the European continent, from the European Union. And rather than intervene and see that's patent nonsense, they sort of worship at a sort of a dead hand the thing is, it's dead and it's not much of a hand. It's helping nobody. And I think all that, put it together, and that's just examples of some of the stuff. We're not living with people who are doing kind of normal stuff. And there's an interesting TED talk. Where in the world is it easiest to become rich? So if people Google that, where in the world is it easiest to become rich? And it's easiest to become rich in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. There are more millionaires and billionaires per capita in those countries. And why is that? Well, says the guy, it's because of strong unions, strong social security networks, and free education. And all that gives a security in society that enables people to move and enables people to sort of accept change and enables people to innovate and keep wages high, which of course drives technology as well. And it's the guy who's presents as both a challenge to the left and the right wing. How are these socialist paradises, as he says, causing so many millionaires and billionaires in society? But also for those who complain that, as one person says in the TED talk, that Norway or Sweden wasn't so much of a social security net, it was a hammock. And then he says at the end of it, he ends up by saying, but these people are a bit like Immanuel Kant's bird, who complained that the air resistance was slowing them down when they flew, while not realizing that all along that very air was providing the lift that enabled them to fly. So the high taxes that paid for the goods of society, the good roads, the good infrastructure, digital and physical, and the hospitals which looked after your elderly and sick relatives or anybody, the money that was paying for your education to help your children benefit in the next generation. The strong unions which enable people to cooperate because unions were respected and worked together rather than a conflict situation. All these things, and the free education, of course, which allowed everybody's talents to come forward. All these things were what helped make a better society, and that's what normal societies do. Sensible societies, successful societies, as is manifestly seen in the Nordic countries.
Yeah, and the extreme is that the United Kingdom does all of those kind of neoliberal policies to the maximum extent. You know, you're talking about privatization, you know, the smashing of the unions and all of those policies that some other countries tried. I mean, another example of the extremism is that the UK is the second most unequal country in the kind of northern Western world. Yeah. And, you know, and that is because of the policies that they're adopting. So I can see where you're coming from with that kind of extreme.
And the point I made earlier with the French, well, the middle earners and the lower earners, I could have expanded on it. What keeps the UK's general statistics looking okay is that the upper earners are earning the same as upper earners elsewhere, or maybe a little more. And that is that inequality you're talking about across society. And the thing is, in the UK, there's a talk of wanting Scandinavian services with American taxes. But what some people are saying the UK is heading for, because it hasn't invested in growth. It's like a farmer who decides that buying seeds is a false economy, because you're only putting them in the ground and wasting them there for 4 or 5 months before he reaps the harvest. So rather than have the high taxes of the good services and the low taxes of the USA, with the nirvana that they seem to think they want, they've ended up with the high taxes of Scandinavia and the poor services of North America, particularly the United States, which is a sign that economic extremism has gone very wrong. And under all that, of course, are people's lives getting crushed, businesses not growing, jobs not happening, quality of life being taken apart. And also when things come in like higher fuel prices, if you're earning less than your counterparts, 20% less than your counterparts in France, or 25% less than your counterparts in France, these globally traded things that come through the dollar are actually going to be harder on you, earning less in your income bracket compared to your peers in other countries such as France.
Yeah, and these are meaningful differences that people
very meaningful differences. I mean, these are the sort of things that now occupy MP surgeries, and it's difficult to take people back to the point that, you know, your personal problem today isn't really to do with you, it's to do with the system you're living in. Now, North America, of course, they will say if you just work harder, and they con people that way, you know, that think positively and work harder. But, you know, no matter how positively you think, you ain't going to change the income bracket. You ain't going to change the wealth for the people in your income bracket in the UK to be comparable to your peers in France overnight.
We just had an interview with Tom Pollard, who's a mental health and poverty campaigner, and he was just talking about the medium and the long-term impact of poverty, and this idea that you can just, you're in poverty for years, and then all of a sudden you get a decent job and everything's fine, and all those mental health issues and all the issues with your poverty of time and networks all disappear. And he's saying there's much more of an awareness within society that this is happening, but not within the government, and certainly not within the way that benefits are handed out and how people are treated who are looking for support from the state. So it was a really interesting interview we had with him.
That's really interesting, because that lends itself to the point that humans are not robots. You've got to look at the whole life experience that people are having. So if they come out of school, university, and a period of not working, or get in maybe to bad habits, or have been allowed to get into crime or whatever, shaking that off in later life might be difficult as well. So let's make sure that people don't have the difficulties, whether it's mental or social or whatever, that's going to lead them into unpleasant circumstances, whether it's mentally unpleasant circumstances or physically unpleasant circumstances, such as jails or police stations or whatever, or even being the victims of crime from other people who are so damaged. And we've known this from Victorian times. I mean, the people who lived in the Victorian slums, they're the great grandparents of many of us today. There was nothing genetically wrong with those people at that time. What was wrong with this was their circumstances. And you can prove it's not genetically wrong by knowing that their great grandchildren are doing fine and doing well, and are probably some of them running businesses at the moment. Probably even sent some of their own kids to private schools in England, such as Eton. But what you've done is wasted people over too many years.
Just to finish on your earlier point there, you said that the government sees all the money it has as spending, and it rarely sees any of that money as investing. And it just and I think that was the point that Tom was making, that as individuals, the government is not investing in individuals to succeed. And I said to him, that's probably a similar situation with the economy. The UK government's not investing to succeed. You mentioned a stat earlier, which was this recent OBR and the European Commission projections for growth in 2023. And it suggested that the UK will be the lowest growing economy out of those. I think it's nearly 30 economies. You've covered a little bit, but I thought it'd be really good just to get kind of succinctly, why do you think that is the case, that you can so clearly say that the UK is the lowest growing out of those 32 economies?
Well, I think the big one, and the big glaringly obvious one, is Brexit. I mean, if you give yourself a 5% pay cut at a time where you probably need money because of the sort of things we were talking about earlier of rising fuel prices or high fuel prices, don't be surprised that you find your economy is not doing very well. If you find that trade is down with your neighbours, because of barriers you've chosen to allow them to erect, but you don't erect them yourself on the way back in because it's economically damaging. Well, don't be surprised when you find yourself at the bottom. And I think Brexit is probably one of the biggest issues there. There is, of course, the issues of UK productivity as well, which have been a sore thumb for quite a long time. Interestingly, at the top of that table, I saw Ireland number 1 and Malta number 2. Now, Ireland, of course, became independent, much mocked, being told that they needed the taxes of England forever to prop themselves up and to have a decent standard of living. They then lost 6 counties that had, was it 60 to 80% of the industry. You come back nearly 100 years later, next month, since the foundation of the Irish state and the current United Kingdom. And Ireland has leapfrogged all parts of the United Kingdom and is number 1 in that table. And number 2 is the equally mocked Malta, who I think the Times in a memorable editorial scoffed at the idea, the Times of London, scoffed at the idea that Malta could be independent. Now, what they've done, of course, is they've seen what is advantageous for them to do. In this constituency, a small example, I'm often wanting, and my fishermen want foreign labour to come in. If foreign labour wants to come in, I can go down the pier in Stornoway almost any time here and speak to fishermen from Ghana. They're here, we want them here, they want to be here, everybody's happy, nobody's got a problem with it. They're great guys, they keep the boats working, they keep the factories working. Every so often the Home Office comes along and creates a problem and wants them out of here. Now, that's an economically damaging step by the Home Office. Who'll then go and tell us that our economy is that bad because of Scotland, blah, blah, blah. But their hand is in there messing it up. And if they would get out of the way, it would be a lot more helpful and better for us. Even in the current UK, they could do something like this, but obviously the centralising tendency of the UK is that they won't. Switzerland, with, was it 10, 12 million people, has got 26 cantons, and the cantons can control some of the visas, and the rest of them control centrally. Now, there's measures there also for Scotland going forward, and let's not create a Scottish state after independence that's too central. If I've got a criticism of Irish state, I've actually got many criticisms of Irish state. I mean, given that it's better than being in the UK for them, we'll leave that one there at the moment. But the criticism would be they've sort of centralised in Dublin. They've created almost, to my eye, a mini UK, with rather than London being the sort of main places, Dublin, and you could say that places like Donegal and Waterford and maybe Cork to an extent, but less so. And I think they've become conscious of that in the last number of years, that there is centralising around Dublin. But had they managed to decentralise properly in Ireland, and if Ireland does go towards reunification, it could be some thought given to that, how they structure. There might be the opportunity to make it better for all parts of Ireland. That change that might come. But applying that to Scotland is, let's not have a Scotland that's centralised in Edinburgh. Let's have a Scotland where we have meaningful powers in various parts of Scotland. I mean, I don't have a template for it, but I think Switzerland shows that 26 units are possible. In Scotland, we've got 32 local authorities. We can do things differently.
Brilliant. Well, Kieran and I are huge fans of this idea of subsidiarity, and Kieran's just going to join us now for the end of our interview. Kieran, thanks so much for joining us. I know you're very outspoken around Brexit, but I just wanted to say to you, if Scotland becomes independent, in what areas do you think that we would be mirroring the challenges that the UK has from Brexit if Scotland leaves the United Kingdom? And one kind of example for you to pick up on straight away is, you said to me, walking away from a large amount of trade with its neighbours. So where are the similarities and where are the differences? Because that's certainly something that we hear, when we speak to economists from across the globe. They say, I'm in principle supportive, but look how bad Brexit has been. Would this not be the case for Scottish independence?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, I've got to just establish what Brexit is. Brexit's walking out of a trade bloc and erecting trade barriers, and imagining that you're becoming independent when you were already independent in the trade bloc. I don't think anybody's arguing that the 27 members of the EU aren't at the United Nations or have international personality elsewhere. Certainly, Scotland doesn't even have national or international personality within the UK, as the Supreme Court showed us this week. So we've got to get that and understand it was walking out of a trade bloc. The nation states controlled all their own political powers, except the few they choose to pool. What we will be doing is taking back political control. And the one difficulty we might have is, as England has a border with everybody in the world, the UK at the moment cannot send a prawn sandwich or a chicken leg to any country in the world without the same weight of paper going with that. Trading with England might have some of those problems as well of paperwork. And the one thing I would, though, imagine is that Scottish independence might be the shock to the deluded psychology of Brexit, might be the shock that makes them realise this is so stupid. Why are we doing this? And would bring them back in to a place to be more prosperous for them, back to the European Union. The amount of small businesses I speak to in England who tell me through my role in international trade, they've just given up trading with Europe because of the bureaucracy and the difficulties involved. And they aren't going to trade with the rest of the world on any trade deals either, incidentally, these size of companies. The number's colossal. So that shock of Scottish independence to them and to the perhaps self-image of what they think maybe Britain, UK is, might be enough to make them go, right, look, let's just end this experiment with surrealism and go back to coin a phrase of a former political opponent. It might be enough to end Brexit for them, to all our benefits. I mean, they are impacting Irish GDP, even though Irish GDP is top of the OECD list at the moment. It would be higher still if it wasn't for Brexit. So Brexit isn't a good thing in the European neighbourhood at all. At least it's affected the perpetrators most, is probably the one consolation for all the neighbours round about. But the other thing that will happen as well is there will be other trading happen, and a lot of the exports that are going out of Scotland, which have been counted as English exports because they leave from ports in England, will be counted as Scottish, and we will probably do what the Irish do, and we'll be sailing around England. And of course, England will need to import what we have. I mean, it's not. People aren't doing each other a favour. It's not a one-way favour to export or to import. You do trade because it's mutually beneficial.
I was going to say that I had discussions about the future central bank of Scotland should be in Aberdeen, where I am. so you know, I think the civil service should be spread around the country in various ways. So yeah, I absolutely think we could do things better. And you know, my understanding is that is how it is in Germany as well.
I hear Aberdeen is the second contender after Stornoway, right enough, for the central bank.
Some home bias there. Angus, you mentioned Ireland, and I often say that I think we can rely on Ireland too much as an independent country, saying, you know, we need to be more like Ireland. And I think there's things that we can do that Ireland do well, and I think there's things that they don't do which we shouldn't do. Yeah. So I don't think it's a bit. But one thing, David McWilliams has just posted a blog post today, and he's suggested that it's possible that the Irish population, let's say post-unification, would be around about 10 million people, and Scotland in 2050 would still be around about under 5.5. And you mentioned that a lot of other kind of neighbours are growing, and Scotland is stagnant. And Kieran often quotes the fact that at the signing of the Act of Union, Scotland was 20% of England's population, and it's now 8%. Could you kind of explain what impact does that have on the economy, but also, I think, almost as importantly, on society, of this idea of just stagnant population growth? So a kind of, you know, a real resources question. What impact does that have?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Irish population is expected to grow about 20% in the next in the next 3 decades. Iceland 32%, and the tiny Faroe Islands 6%. Now, I mentioned the Faroe Islands because they're reasonably near the Hebrides. We are their nearest neighbour, and we're probably going to be the worst in the stagnant Scotland here in the Hebrides. And as the Scottish population falls 2%, ours will fall more than that. And it falls also because of the good education our young receive, and then the lack of opportunities with that education back in the islands, which is very unlike the Faroe Islands nowadays. And what does that mean? Well, it usually means for social care services, for health services in particular going forward, finding people is difficult. And I do know my local health board is worried that this is a very real problem. It's not just let's say that we would like more people living in the Highlands and Islands. We'd want more. We also know that the 3% of migrants that came to stay amongst us from about 2001 onwards contributed to about 7% of the births and the school's population. So that's why we want that sort of control. But we also want control that will make us able to put things into our society in the way the Faroese have, that can pull people back. The Faroese have made some very real choices. They've had physical and digital infrastructure that has made Tórshavn. There's only 52,000 people in the island group, but they can go to Tórshavn within an hour with undersea tunnels. They've got the best 4G connections in the world, and better than South Korea, and they've got fibre to each and every house, which then makes even the rural places become attractive, and particularly for women and young women. I think the numbers are quite colossal for the Hebrides. Of the 26,000, the health board recently told me that what they would really need to move into the islands here are probably about over 1,000 women of childbearing age. Now it's about 2,000 people to come from wherever, or to attract and maintain the young that have gone away for education. And that ain't going to happen in a hurry, and it's certainly not going to happen with a UK Home Office that prevents people who want to come from coming. The second issue probably we've got ourselves is, you know, that we've got plenty of land in the Hebrides too, but getting control of that is a difficulty. And you know, we do know that many more people want to come here than can. So there are local factors about land and crofting that we need to look at, and sometimes that can be difficult to explain to people in the in Holyrood even. that there are different ways of doing things. And also, I think in housing, well, we've done a lot for social housing in many parts of Scotland. Not everybody wants social housing. Other people want to have different types of housing in the mix. So that's another issue that we have to think about. How, if we've got professionals coming here, if we've got people to come to work in the hospital here in Stornoway, or doctors or surgeons or whatever, can they get a bit of land to build the house they particularly want to have in what is a very beautiful location? Quite often they can't. So that is really what the problems of population has on us here, and that could be elsewhere in Scotland as well. I think it was North Ayrshire was the next worst, but the least with North Ayrshire, you can drive in and out in an hour. I mean, I'm not diminishing those issues for the day-to-day in a community, but for us getting professionals and for getting people to stay, there are distinct challenges of care workers, and the two types of people we need to come in at certain various employment levels, if you like, in society. And going back to the earlier point, is that we do want to have whatever level you're on in society, that you're equivalent to your peers in other countries. You know, this idea that the bottom third of earners are 25% poorer than those in France, it has to come to an end. I mean, there's inequality in society. We've no idea where our children or grandchildren can end up in those brackets in life. So given that we presumably love our children and grandchildren, that we want to provide the best chances for them regardless of what happens to them. And I think that's better achieved with greater inequality and with greater equality, in society.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is the real resource. Your population is the real resource. You can look about your natural resources in terms of your natural capital and all the other things that your country offers, but the population is crucial for so many reasons. And I think that even if Scotland wanted to increase its population substantially, it can't do that because of the impact of, as you said, the Home Office, and it's fundamentally hamstringing any small nation when it's been unable to grow.
And also a lot of government functions are taken south. You know, a lot of the things that should be happening in Scotland is not just the public wealth that goes out of Scotland in the form of taxes and of natural resources. It's a private flight of capital as well that's going with people. And you could do an awful lot more to keep and hold people, as Iceland will show you, as whoever has become independent in the last 100 years will show you, if you have the right policies. And having the wrong policies, such as the UK, who've lost the European Medicines Agency and lost the banking agency because of that. I mean, in the space of London, it's probably a small thing, but it's a big enough thing. But if you can have the independence of the right policies, you're going to hold people here for various reasons. And you're absolutely right about the resources, as Elon Musk is finding out. All these firings are costing him billions.
People are important.
Totally, the resource of Twitter is inside the heads of the people.
Yeah. I mean, when I moved back to Scotland, I moved to Dundee initially, and the university there. When Theresa May was Home Secretary, she stopped students coming over to do masters at Dundee and they were paying £10,000 a pop for that course, and that department really just decimated it. And also, when I was living in Edinburgh, they used to have, so this is a few years ago, they used to have a cultural event for the Indian students, and that completely stopped again because those Indian students went to Canada instead.
Yeah, and Theresa May's policy wasn't envisaged with Dundee in mind. Theresa May's policy was envisaged with sort of difficulties from the Daily Mail headlines in mind that were playing badly back to people in the home counties. And because nobody in politics in that neck of the woods, either in the Labour or the Conservative side, was prepared to make an argument why you should have migration and why it's good, therefore those policies descended on Dundee. And incidentally, I think the Russell Group of Universities told me one time that every 6 students that come to the UK each year contribute about £1 million to GDP from the multiplier effect. So if that's right, and if I remember that correctly, it is a fantastic sum of money. It's not just the fees they pay, it's the rents they're paying, it's everything else that they're doing while they're here. And of course, you get them, if they're finished, if you're wise at the end of that, you let them stay when you've got them at the very zenith of their educational experience the most market in the workplace for the workers.
I think it's also important that we encourage them to go home as well and support the economies that they're coming from. And I think we're still in a position where, you know, Scotland has to realise that a great way for us to add a real resource to the countries that need it is not with development money, but it's actually educating and training and returning these individuals back to their economies. Now, before I let you go, I really wanted to ask you a question around something you retweeted a couple of weeks ago, and it was on something that we've not covered yet in depth, which is this idea of sectorial balances. And I'm going to put the image up on screen to jog your memory, because I didn't tell Angus I was going to do this, but this is the image that you retweeted. It was something, I think, from Richard Murphy, and I just wondered if you wanted to kind of just talk about what this shows to you in terms of the policy that our government continually maintains is the best way to support an economy. Well, this sectorial balance shows that the government is in deficit, then the households are in surplus.
Yeah,
you know,
and that's a strong point of the modern monetary theorists, that every time the government wants to tax or cut, they're taking money out of the economy, and this is what they're doing coming forward to the recession at the moment. So we're heading towards a recession where they want to take opportunity out of the economy through taxing and cutting. And the argument is, particularly when you have your own currency, that you've got huge choices. And rather than being enthralled to the doctrines of austerity, you can actually invest. And, you know, despite what they say about the heroes of the past, Margaret Thatcher and whatever, Margaret Thatcher's government, in government, the UK borrowed for 9 out of the 11 years. And 8% of her tax revenue was anyway from Scottish oil. So she would have probably been borrowing for 11 out of 11 years. And her highest rate of tax on the top earners was 60%, incidentally. But that's we'll leave that to one side at the moment. The other point, and then amongst that Richard Murphy points out very well, is in the last 77 years, the UK has borrowed in all years but 11 of those years. And it's paid back only 1.7%. Of the debt. Another thing to remember is that the UK government invents fiscal rules for itself. Now, the key word here is invents fiscal rules for itself, and they have a sort of a gap that they find acceptable. Remember, they've only paid back 1.7% anyway, and they've got a gap that they want to achieve. It's not based in any economic science. No. And then if they look like they're going to spend more than they're going to tax, this is called a black hole. But there's gap anyway. It's not an economic term. It's a term of sort of probably comes from viewing politics and national government as a household. And as you're absolutely right, you're saying, you know, that gap of I think it is best put by the modern monetary theorists as government deficit is a society surplus. And I think there's another good piece of work by Stephanie Kelton, which shows that every time the USA went to balance its budgets, usually under the Democrats, who were usually getting scolded from the other side, a recession usually followed, because by getting the public finances into the surplus, i.e. overtaxing, they found that the society surplus had diminished and there was less money to invest and less money to do things with companies, and that then led to a slowing down. There wasn't so much oil in the economy in the form of cash being injected. I was really pleased to see you highlight that, because I think it's a one pager that a lot of people can understand. And I think at the beginning of that I was saying it's a profile that other countries don't follow. You know, that I don't know of other countries at the moment who might be going into a recession are going to cut and to tax. And you know, the other point about that is, yeah, we're talking sort of dryly at the moment about numbers and what that affects in the economy. What that actually affects day to day is less money for social security, less money in people's wages. It's affecting child poverty. It's affecting children's development. It's now affecting the next generation. It's going to store up problems for the future. And if you're not dealing with, let's say, dyslexic kids who, when I think the dyslexic population or the prison population are half dyslexic or have dyslexic issues, you are storing up more problems for the future and greater expenditure and greater waste of people. So behind those graphs that the UK is going, or the path the UK is going, is the seeds for further waste of people, unfortunately. And that, again, is what should be driving people's thoughts towards independence is, these are policy choices. All this is policy choices that they're making, and people's lives is what gets trampled under that sort of moralising with money that the Tories tend to do, and they moralise with a stick for the poorer, and they moralise with a carrot for the richer.
Well, at the start, you said that you were speaking about economic extremists, and we'd said that that was definitely a cause of the situation that the UK finds itself. And you mentioned Brexit as being one of the key drivers. And I think there you've just highlighted another driver for that was George Osborne's austerity policies in the 2010s. And it looks like, to all intent and purposes, we're ready to do that again. So this idea that out of this kind of, we're going to have a phoenix coming from the fire by completely doing, I think it's the definition of madness, isn't it? Doing the same thing again and expecting a different outcome, I think is where we're going to find ourselves.
Well, I just wanted to bring it onto a lighter note to the end of this interview and just say I believe that you're doing great things for food sovereignty, and that you've won a prize for potatoes.
I did, yes. And if my friend Kenny McIntosh is watching, who organises the Barra Potato Competition, who sent me pictures beforehand. I mean, I don't like to boast in the first place, but since you got me onto the topic, he sent me pictures beforehand of the wooden spoon, and then he put in a small local paper in Barra. There's no real reward in winning the Barra Potato Competition. I mean, it's only bragging rights. Now, what a mistake that was by Kenny. I was his equivalent to the Supreme Court's mistake about pointing out that democracy trumps law when it comes to matters of constitution, and that we can use going forward in future. We can use elections rather than, as well as referendums if we're enabled to have one. But certainly on potatoes, I've taken every opportunity to mention Tosh and to get photographs of people with the trophy, which I WhatsApped to Tosh. But yeah, I'm very delighted that I won the Barra Potato Competition organised by Kenneth James McIntosh. He's a hell of a man, and I hope that next year is much the same. And Kenny's just as happy with the result.
And the central bank is coming to Aberdeen, right?
And Angus,
you've softened me up now with winning the potato competition. It's like I've taken that as a sop. Easily corruptible if you can give me next year's Barra Potato Competition.
What your thoughts were of sterlingisation and what impact that would have on an independent Scotland, the difference between a currency user and a currency issuer.
Scotland has to have its own currency going forward. I mean, it's what every other country can do. We know that at Westminster at the moment they can turn on the taps whenever they want. It's been very obvious what's happened in the last 12 years, both at the pandemic time and in 2008. They could print their own money, basically. And the economist J.K. Galbraith said that the mind would be repelled if it just understood how easily money is made. Words to that effect. And in Scotland, we need to be able to make our own money, to ensure the economy can move, that people can exchange. And if we are stuck with the policies of somebody else, we will find ourselves that if they want to contract the money supply or take money out, we are going to be burned by that too. So we want as short a period as possible with the UK pound. And, Ireland's doing well with the euro, yeah, but Ireland would do even better if it had its own currency. And that's an economic fact. And not all Eurozone countries are as fortunate as the situation the Irish currently have. So you're better off your own currency. There are 180 of them in the world. 181 or 182 when Scotland has its own currency.
That's great. We really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Enjoy your weekend. Bye now.
I'll take that as an instruction. Cheers.
Bye. Well, thanks very much for all the comments. Been really busy tonight with your comments. That was a shorter episode than normal, but I really hope that you enjoyed hearing Angus's perspective on the economy. I don't think we hear enough from our elected politicians in Scotland about these macro economic issues. We hear the stories around Brexit causing problems in areas like that, but we really need to hear much more kind of the fundamental discussions on economics. So we hope we got a little bit of that from Angus for you. Next week, we have a wonderful interview on around mental health and poverty and what impact that has on individuals and also society and the economy. And then the following week, we have an interview around one of Scotland's biggest natural resources, water. And then we'll probably have a little bit of break over the holidays. But thanks very much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next week when we're talking about the impact of poverty and mental health. Bye for now.